Segmentation, targeting, and positioning is a very competitive tool that marketers have. It's called STP, or segmentation, targeting, and positioning, and it should be developed and processed and implemented in this order: S, then T, and then P. Most of the time, businesses actually do the opposite, which is PST. It's always S and T, so it can only be PST or STP. And so why is this? Because segmentation is dividing the market. How do you divide the market? You divide the market into using the most common factors that define who are the customers. Customers are defined by their culture, their social group, their personal factors, and then how they think, the psychological factors. Oftentimes, consumers are looked at on where do they live, what are their gender, what are their ages, how do they think, and why would they buy. So segmenting is essentially dividing, versus targeting is selecting which group you will focus on. The most difficult thing is not to select, the most difficult thing is to divide, because there's so many ways you could dividing people. So you have to try to be salient by using the fewer number of characteristics to divide, in order to not divide with too many characteristics, but because the more you add characteristics, the smaller the group, the customers group, potential group, eventually your target will be. So the less characteristics of segmentation, the better. But because we live in such a competitive environment, essentially we do have more and more characteristics oftentimes being added in order to go after a very specific group, or a more defined group with more precision. Once you've defined what are the characteristics to segment, you go into what are the type of targeting that you will be using. And so you look at the targets, the best targets are depending on the size of the segment. Obviously, you don't want to go after a tiny segment most of the time. Sometimes you want, but most of the time you wouldn't want. You would want to go after segments that are very promising as well. And then it would also depend on your characteristic as a company. Can we serve? Who can we serve better? Which group seems to be growing, and which group we anticipate will continue growing, and that we have the capacity to serve. That's the best match with the type of product that we sell. This becomes your target, and once you've defined your target, you can think about the strategy of this target, which is we have several targets, but eventually our product could be sold to everyone. So our targeting strategy is called undifferentiated, which means that we're going to be going after all the different potential targets without separation. Concentrated is when you see that there are different groups, maybe there's men and women, but there's not enough difference between these two groups, that you will make this product for young men and young women without making a difference. Maybe you could have young men, young women, and older men, and that would be three groups, because with the older men and the young men, there would be no differences. But with the older women, maybe there are differences. So these targets could be used in order to sell this product. Differentiated is when you will see that you have many competitors, that you have limited resources, that maybe it's very important to increase the satisfaction, because there's so much competition that you would want to make one product for one specific target. And in terms of corporate strategy, this is called niche or focus. This is what happened to the razor industry, where most of the razors for the longest time were made exclusively for men, and eventually women started using men's razors, and eventually the producers of razors started developing razors for women. So the target was all the men, and that's it. And eventually it was different men for different type of razors, and eventually it was different type of razors for different men and for the women. And then eventually there were different type of razors for different type of women. This company was started in China, and they were selling cheese, and nobody in China eats cheese beside the foreigners. So when this gentleman who lived a long time in Europe decided to make cheese in China, he could not sell any of the cheese because nobody of the Chinese were going to buy it. So eventually he did segmentation by looking at the different culture in China that were from overseas and where they were. So there were some Germans, there were some Belgians, there were some French, there were some Italians, and these people really care for the cheese. So he started finding out where they were, which city, which area of the city, which store did they go to, and eventually he created specific cheese, not the one that he liked the most, but the one that the targets we would like the most. And eventually he was able to go through production of cheese as being very differentiated for the different areas in China. and he became extremely successful because he used the STP model in order to develop. So P is for positioning, and like I said, most of the businesses do PST, which means that they start from what they should finish. Normally, the business, they care about who's the customers and what do they want. And there, when you do PST, you say, what do I want the customers to care? And then who are the customers? So it's a little backwards. So that's why STP is so much better. Positioning is creating an image, a meaning for the product to be understood by the consumers and in sort of against your competitors. So oftentimes you use the product attributes. What is the most biggest feature that is the most important and that they're looking for? When do they use the product? Who's buying this product? What are the competitors' features that are being put forward by them? And then what is this class of product and how do we want to associate ourselves with this product? Can we slightly change? You know, this is a beverage, yes, this is a beer, yes, but maybe this is a low calorie beer and we're trying to not compete within the beer category, but within the low calorie beer category. So the right competitive advantage is the one looking at the one that are the most important. So the attribute, the best one, you don't want to take something that's trivial, you want to take the one that is the most important. However, the most important is oftentimes the one also used by your competitors. So why I go to a family resort like Disney or Knott's Berry Farm is because I want to have fun. So this concept of fun could be the positioning, but the problem is all the results are somewhat using some concept around fun. So maybe I have to use something else. Therefore, I have to be distinctive. But then I have to be distinctive, but it can't be just different, and that doesn't make it better. It needs to be superior. It needs to be easy to communicate. It needs to get a reaction from the target, because when they hear it, they hear the difference, and it's meaningful difference. It needs to be affordable because you can't come up with a positioning that it's so great that it's unbelievable, and then it's going to cost a fortune to implement and for the consumers to be able to buy, that you have sort of set yourself such a high bar that you never achieve. So positioning is explained by showing some kind of map of positioning. And if this map is proposed by the marketer, it's called a positioning map. However, if it's a map that is defined by the consumer, it's called a perception map. So the most common of this map, to explain it, not to use in business, because to use in business is too simple, but to explain it is price versus quality. So the positioning may be low price, but positioning may be high price, the positioning may be high quality and low quality. And using this orthogonal matrix, you can put your brand of where you want your brand to be. That's a positioning map. If you give the matrix to a consumer and you ask the consumer to put various brands on this matrix, this becomes a perception map because it's from the perception of the consumers. To summarize, is you have 3 steps. And again, the positioning should be the last step, where you define what are the characteristics of your consumers, because these are meaningful characteristics. And then you're looking at grouping these segments into what you will call the targets. Then you select the target, and then you come up with a meaningful identity for your brand that will get the target excited about your brand. In reality, I mean, this is how it's been taught. I think in reality, and this is my own personal perspective, is since I would say 90% of the business, maybe more, do PST, but yet the academics and the professional recommend to do STP. My personal perspective is it should be PSTP, where the companies start by looking at what they think their positioning should be, but that knowing that won't be the positioning that they will have at the end. Then they will look into the market of what the consumer wants, and then they will make an adjustment of the P, the original P. Because I think when you have a business, you should have, you're doing a business based on your own leadership, and your own leadership will have from the get-go some kind of positioning that you want to be meaningful to you before you think of the consumers. So I think PST is weak, but I think talking about STP from the get-go is sort of unrealistic. So I think the most realistic perspective is to think about PSTP as being what really everyone should do. So that way they don't ignore the reality of every business starting with their own image and then looking for a customer and then readjusting what their image should be in order to be more salient.